So welcome once more as we start recording. My name is Lina Silveira. I'm Sun's project manager at F6S Innovation. We are partners of this wonderful project that is financed by the European Union. We call it SUN because it's some of the letters from Space Hubs Network. So you'll be hearing SUN, but we're referring to Space Hubs Network. And today we'll have a great session here that we hope that you are able to participate the whole time. And as soon as I can, I will, okay. And I'll present to you now the agenda. So you have a bigger picture of what to expect today. We'll be starting with my presentation regarding the SUMS program, Space Hubs Network, as I told you. Followed by the tips when applying for funding or programs from Nicola Musgrove. And we'll follow up question and answer after a presentation. We'll have time also for some interaction during a presentation from what we've seen. It will be a very interesting presentation, I'm sure. And it will follow from this question and answer. It will follow also the presentation from Cyber Chambers. Tips for a good pitch, where I have also the opportunity to gain more insight on how to present your projects, not only the written form, but also orally. And this will be also followed by a question and answers, and we'll be doing the closing remarks afterwards. So let's start firstly knowing what is the context of this webinar. So this webinar was created and is organized by F6S in the context of Space Hubs Network, this amazing project that is financed by the European Union or Horizon 2020 still at the time financed. We have 7 consortium partners, as you can see here by the logos that we have: Civita, Startup Division, AxisNav, where we have Simon today speaking, and is from AxisNav, Polska, Brimatech, Science Park, GRAS, and of course, as I mentioned, the organizer of this session, which is F6S. The goal of this project is to increase commercialization of space and enable solutions and growth of European startups and scale-ups. And how do you do that? So we have a whole program that we want also to tell you a bit more as we are also closing the program, but it's important for you to know also the impact that we reach. So in the business and space industry, we realized that we needed more support. Therefore, this project also replies to that need. So we gave also a support network for all space startups. And we also try to get out there more information about the space industry, because we also realized that the space industry was still an unknown area for many business, and it can be so transversal, and we wanted to present that and really draw the attention to all the advantages that the business market could have by associating and promoting and really searching what is up and what is being created by the space innovators. We also try to do through this project, and I think we achieved it. We're presenting more information after, to have startups address individual needs that often doesn't exist. So also, through SUN actions, we build bridges between existing support and initiatives. So we aim to fill the gaps between existing initiatives and match startups with suitable support programs. So we try also to help them to see the bigger pictures. And we do so also by organizing events and participating in existing events also, where we talk about existing opportunities in space and how to attain them. And this webinar is one of these actions where you can have more information, how to have better chances to really have that opportunity to use the fundings, for example. or to reach out to investors. We also provide through mentorships, and we have today 2 mentors in our events, so as Simon and Nicola, that provide individual tailoring one-on-one mentorship programs. And these one-on-one mentorship programs allow us also to address the specific needs, as we told before, that was detected as a need on the market. So in terms of impact and results, so far, and this has been a program that already started more than 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. Sun Mentorship Program results were in the pre-incubation program. We had 150 applications, and we selected from those 76 teams that were helped, were mentors, where needs were addressed specifically on their cases. We also have, in another stage of maturity, the pre-acceleration program for startups that are in another stages. We also had a post-acceleration program, and here in total we have 23 countries addressed. So from this 76 teams selected, and also we had more than 70 mentors that really addressed those 76 selected teams' needs. And we're talking about more than 1,000 mentoring hours dedicated to these teams that were selected either in the pre-incubation program, either in the pre-acceleration program, or the post-acceleration program. So you can see here in the map also some of the countries that were that had teams that were selected, and it's quite broadened throughout Europe. And you can see here countries as Portugal, Poland, Romania, Turkey, Ukraine, so Norway. So there's a lot of teams that were selected that represent the whole Europe. So it's really important in terms of impact, and we're very proud of these results. So how do we really reach out to our startups? In many ways, but one of them was in person. Finally, we had the opportunity after COVID to be in person in events, as you know, and probably you also participating in these in-person events that still are very important for networking. And we reach out in events as Podium, as the Galactica Hackathon, in Space Week in Prague. So in many ways, we try to be as close as possible and really facilitating the network, facilitating the access to know-how. And this support also, that we give also this support to develop opportunities, to develop this stage of maturity. So we're very happy with the results, and we hope that you can also know more about our program. We'll be presenting later the several sources where you can get this information. But for now, I will present also here and thank also the time and the availability from Nicola Musgrove. Well, I will be addressing now as Nick. Thank you. She gave me this authorization to address her as Nick. It's lovely to meet you, Nick. Nick is Entrepreneurial Programs Director of Anchored in Lady, and is also a son's mentor. We're very proud to have her as a mentor. And she will be also now presenting, as we announced, the tips when applying for funding or programs. And she will be sharing her screen, so you will have more information on this, and I hope you enjoy. Nick, I give you the slides, not the floor, but the slides.
Certainly the slides. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm as I say, Nicola Musgrove. I don't need to introduce myself again. I have mentored, I think, 8 or 9 companies through the Sun program now. So it's been a year or so since I've been working on it. But I have mentored through the Cassini Hackathon program and run European Space Agency business incubation centers before. So I kind of know what I'm talking about when it comes to these things. I'm going to ask that we hold questions to the end. We've got quite a short session today, so I just want to run on through, and then any questions that you've got, either chuck them in the chat window or we'll get a chance to answer them shortly. I will send a copy of the slides over as well, so if anybody wants a copy, then feel free to have a look. And the first thing I was going to ask, and I think because I can't actually see your faces today, so it's going to be interesting, is if you could pop your thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat window to give me an idea as how many of you have actually applied for funding before. Because it can be quite challenging and daunting. And those of you who have applied for funding might have found it quite a difficult experience. And it's interesting for me to understand, well, what's the kind of experience levels that you've got and what your success rates might be. So if you feel like sharing, it'd be really good for me to know where you fit in that landscape right now. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to have a think about different funding opportunities and what's out there. And I'm going to use the Innovate UK Smart Grant as an example for this, because it's quite it's a broad church in terms of a funding opportunity, but the way that the assessors work and the way that the questions work are quite similar to a lot of other funding programs that are out there. So it's a good one to use as an example point. There's nobody's putting their thumbs up yet. I don't know if it's because I can't see them or not. Perhaps that's the case. Does anybody know what the average pass mark is for a smart grant, or generally for grants in general at the moment? Chances are you might not know this answer, or you might have done some research into it when looking for grant opportunities that are perhaps undersubscribed. But the smart grant in the UK, the pass mark at the moment is 84%. Now that means that you've got to get quite a strong score when it comes to the questions that you're answering. Your answers have got to be pretty perfect. And each question that you answer is typically scored on a scale of 1 to 10. So, 84% means you're going to be having to score 9s and 10s to accommodate any potential shortfalls that you might get in other questions. So that means you, as I say, you've got to be pretty perfect. But in the Smart Grant, the success rate for projects, these are the number of applications that converted into paid projects, was 7.6% of applications. There was about 1,200 applications that came in, and only 7.6% of those were funded, 10.2% in the larger funding pots. Now, what that shows is that there is massive competition out there that you're up against. And so you're not only having to present a really strong business case for why they should fund you and why now, but you're also up against a lot of other companies that are getting support from grant writers and funding support from mentors. So your competition landscape is certainly very crowded at the moment. And the reason I mentioned SMART as an example is because it does distribute up to £100 million worth of funding into the UK. And it's not even sector specific. So that's in addition to other funding opportunities that are out there. And you might have something similar in your own countries. And you've certainly got incubators and accelerators that are there to drive economic value for your country, create jobs, and create opportunity for certain industries. And it's worth bearing that in mind in the back of your mind when you're applying for these things, because whilst you might be applying for funding to develop your business or your project, the reason why that funding is being offered to you is to stimulate economic value where you are. And you need to think that in your mind when you're presenting your business case as well. Now, usually funding is offered for specific purposes. For grants, it's typically for research and development, so bringing new products to market, developing opportunities for business growth. They tend to be quite sector specific in some cases. SMART is the exception for that. But you've got your space specific funding opportunities, a lot of energy and net zero related funding calls right now. They're also being done as a capital investment into the business to stimulate growth in a particular area. And I've seen this happening in quite a lot of regions where incubators and accelerators have been created to help stimulate additional economy or industry in a particular sector or area. So in the UK, around Harwell, we have the ESA Business Incubation Centre, which was a Kickstarter for the space ecosystem at Harwell, which now has UK Space Agency headquarters, European Space Agency headquarters for the UK, and a load of other testing facilities and businesses that have popped up around them. But again, you just need to think about what is the specific funding purpose, and does my business or the project that I want to get funded align with those purposes and the needs of the funder. You also need to make sure that you know what the limits are, because what I've seen in some things is there are particular dates, particular amounts, and certain ways that you need to structure your project to make sure that you fit within the scope of the programme. So again, this is an example of an Innovate UK funding call, and I actually saw somebody whose application failed because they got their dates wrong. Now, in this particular one, the start date was the 1st of October 2023. Now, this might be the genuine, but the 1st of October for one of the previous applications actually happened to fall on a Monday. on a Sunday, and they didn't want to start their project until the Monday, the first working week. So when they set out their project plan, they put down the 2nd of October. So all the effort they put into their application meant nothing, because they were literally rejected at the first hurdle, because they said they had started on the 2nd of October and the project plan said it had to start by the 1st. Equally, I saw another application get rejected because they, whilst they got their dates right and their project plan, they put in a project duration of 17 months, but the value of the project was £504,000 because they hadn't checked that their costs had aligned properly, and they'd done some tweaks along the line. So again, they were rejected without receiving any feedback whatsoever, because they put £504,000 into a project that would only take £500,000 for under 18 months. If they'd have done 19 months, they could have had up to 2 million, and it would have been no problem at all. But those sorts of things can really be demoralizing when you've spent weeks preparing an application, making sure it's perfect, and nobody even looks at it because you fail to understand the limits of the opportunity that you've got. So as we go along through my presentation, you'll start to see these blue slides with an orange thing in the corner. These are actual tips from real-world grant assessors. So Innovate UK, GBIP, and EU grant funding opportunities as well. So these are real assessors have given me this feedback. So make sure when you are applying that you choose the grant that aligns with your business needs, the sector, and the needs of whoever the grant funder is before you apply. I have seen a lot of people try and make their opportunity fit into what it is that they're offering, but the assessors see through it quite quickly. And it tends to be that reasoning for making decisions or doing certain things is quite tenuous. And so as a result, the assessor just goes, no, do you know what, I'll downscore this and somebody else will get the funding. So we're making sure we work through the scope. But the other thing is, as I've already said, is that it's a really crowded landscape for applying for funding right now. So the challenge is, well, how do we stand out in a crowd? With any grant application or funding application or accelerator application, you need to think that treat it like an exam. But it's an exam like a story. And so you need to develop a compelling narrative that helps to bring the assessor into your world. We are a culture, we are a people that thrive on storytelling. We've been doing it for thousands of years, and it really helps certainly assessors to understand if you can build a compelling story and hit those emotive points when presenting an opportunity to an assessor. When you are presenting this story, though, the challenge is that typically a lot of these applications will have a word count limit. And so you will need to present your business case in a fixed amount of space, answering a fixed number of questions, and making sure in a very short space of time, you can convince a panel of assessors, and typically they're usually about 5 of them, at least in these panels. I know from Innovate UK experience, they are five different assessors. And you'll always find that one of them will just get it. They'll probably be working close in your industry. They might have even met you before at some point, and they'll want to have your babies. They want to give you the money to make sure that you can do what you need to do. 3 of the assessors will be kind of, yeah, okay, we get it. We'll give you some points. I'll give it 5, more like 7, but 7's not going to get you into the winning scores. 7s, you need to be hitting 8s and 9s, really. Otherwise, your 7s are going to drag you down later on. We talked about that 84% earlier. And there's always one assessor, and you've probably all had this before, that would rather eat worms than see your project get funded. Typically, there are different types of assessors, and it's worth bearing in mind how assessors think and the sort of time that they're given. Now, in Innovate UK, when they do a smart grant assessment, they're given a maximum of 2 hours typically to review an application, and for that, they're paid £120. Now, as consultants, £120 for 2 hours work isn't a lot. You know, this is quite a pay cut for what they're getting in some other areas. And so they might not necessarily give it the attention they perhaps should do. So you tend to find that consultants, those who are working in industry, very busy people, might take that 2 hours and actually review your application in half an hour. And so in which case they're looking for keywords. They're looking for things that allow them to tick a box to say, I've seen that answer. The retirees, on the other hand, those that have perhaps come from academia or worked in industry historically, they'll give it more time. And so you'll tend to find they're the ones that want to have your babies, so to speak. They're the one that absolutely love it. But the unscrupulous consultants, the ones that have given it half an hour because they're too busy and they're squeezing it in between other things, they're the ones that you'll notice when you get feedback for these things. It looks like they didn't even read the application. And that's because they haven't. not in any great detail anyway, because they simply don't have the time to do so. So what I want you to try and think about is to present the information in a way that tells a story, that allows you to answer the question in such a way that the assessor can say, yep, tick, 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 I've seen that answer. I can at least give it the minimum score required to make it hit the quality threshold, the pass threshold to get into the funding area. In Innovate UK funding, that's 70% is the threshold. It doesn't mean you're going to get the money, because then its highest score wins, but at least you put in for consideration. And you typically find a lot of funding calls are like that. They will have a threshold where they will just kick things back, or they'll push it forward, and then they'll make an assessment from there. And when it comes to answering the actual questions, typically the first batch of questions are mechanical. They're the ones that are put down as not scored. Now, not scored does not mean not important, because these questions can get you rejected. Some of them are the scope questions that we talked about earlier, but also the assessors tend to read them as preamble. They read them as the kind of preview for what they're about to get. And if they like it at that stage, then you might find that they actually review your application a little bit more kindly when they're moving through the rest of it. And so they'll be a little bit more forgiving if there's certain mistakes made. If you don't put the effort into those beginning bits, you can also really annoy your assessors. So they look at the application with perhaps not so nice glasses on. They're not seeing it in the way that you would want them to. Usually, one of these first questions is a scope question. How do you align with the specific funding opportunity that you're going for? So this is where we talked earlier about the sector, the regional priorities you might be meeting, the sector, the technology priorities that you might be meeting. This is the place where you avoid being rejected before you actually get assessed. So if you don't fit the criteria, doesn't matter how much effort you put into answering the questions, do not pass go, do not get an assessment feedback. You're just getting kicked out. And bear in mind, you're unlikely to be funded if your application is requesting funding to pay off debts, to fund staff costs. And by this, I mean recruitment costs. Typically, grants will fund the time that staff spend on the project or working within whatever it is the grant is funding. They won't provide liquidity or working capital for the business or general setup costs. They might pay for a portion of a piece of machinery for its use within a project, but they won't necessarily pay for replacement machinery or items that you purchased in the past and now want to be able to claw some money back for. So bear in mind that if you've started to try and build these costs in, you're likely to get rejected because it's not within the scope of the competition. One of the other things that I would point out, and this has come from an assessor, is whatever financials that you present when you are looking at the scope, make sure that whatever you're saying matches whatever you've put in your project plan or whatever you've stated elsewhere in the document. Because I see a lot of times where people start out with preamble and then contradict themselves later in the application when they start to drill into some of the answers. And I've also seen where the project costs that they've submitted don't align with the costs that they've stated within the project plans and the processes and the mechanical documentation. So bear that in mind, because in a lot of ways, this is not only describing your attention to detail, but also you're demonstrating value for money in the way that the costs are being spent and how things are being presented. So another part of the non-scored questions usually is a project summary, an introduction to what it is you're getting funding for. Now, this is that really critical thing I was saying. They need to read this and go, yes, I get this. I totally understand. I'm going to put those rosy glasses on and look at the rest of this application because I'm excited. I would suggest you got quite punchy in the way that you describe that. Yes, use short words, economist style. So 9-word short sentences in active tense. An active tense is, and I've seen this described in another workshop before, so I'm shamelessly stealing it, is if you can add the words by zombies to the end of your sentence, it is not an active tense. You're effectively saying we will do this is active, it will be done is not active, and you could add by zombies and it would make sense. So if you can add by zombies to the end of your sentence, it's not active. But bear in mind, as I say, punchy, use a bit of sales language, but remember, assessors tend to be technical people, they're professionals. So the more sales and fluff you add to it, the more they're likely to distrust what it is that you're saying as being too good to be true as well. I'm going to run you through an example question. Again, this was taken for the Innovate UK Smart Grant because it's just a good catch-all. And this was the first question that was around at the time from the previous funding call that I was talking about. So what is the need or challenge? What is the thing that you are looking to solve, the problem that you are addressing? And so if you look at the question, the actual question, the top level question asks, what is the business need, citizen challenge, technological challenge, or market opportunity behind your innovation? Now, a lot of people would just answer that question. And what they fail to recognize is typically in a lot of these applications, there are sub-questions that make up that full question. So in this particular one, you had to explain the main motivation for the project, the business need, technological challenge, or market opportunity. Read or as and, because they want to know all three things, regardless of whether it says or. The nearest state of the art, so talking about the competitors, who's doing what and why doesn't it meet the needs right now? Any work you've already done to respond to this need? Have you done market research? Have you developed a prototype? Have you done scientific research in a lab to make sure that the science works? The wider economic, social, environmental, cultural, or political challenges which are influential in creating this opportunity. So what's driving this? Why this? Why now? And if appropriate, any challenges or opportunities relating to EDI arising from this project. EDI being equality, diversity, and inclusion. Now, certainly in the UK right now, you do need to bear in mind equality, diversity, and inclusion, and how your project doesn't necessarily cause more problems, or that it takes into consideration ways that it can enhance the current diversity and inclusion situation. So if you're thinking about a certain challenge, it might be that there are issues that arise as a result of equality, diversity, and inclusion. So for example, I worked with a company a few years ago that was developing diabetes applications. Now, diabetes affects people from African backgrounds 5 times more than white European backgrounds. And so there's an inclusion challenge there, where there is a group that are more affected. And so actually being able to identify prediabetes in that group earlier would mean that they are less impacted by that challenge. So when producing an answer, in this case, this is about recycling PVC plastic, but from windows. So you can see on the answer, where it's put in orange, we've actually put a nod to the question. So it's easy for the assessor to pull out, tick box, they have answered that part of that question. So our main motivation for this project was the amount of window frames being discarded at the recycling plant. 88% of UK PVC is currently not recycled. So it talks about the pain, it gives a proper statistic. As we explored the market, so it's talking about the previous work we've done, we discovered that this unmet business need was due to a lack of processing facilities. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see sprinkled into the answer are the actual words from the question itself. So that unscrupulous assessor, the one that would rather see you eat worms, can at least say they've seen you answer each of those questions. Now, in an Innovate UK Smart Grant, that would get you at least a 70%, because you've answered the questions that are presented. And again, it goes on, but you can see when you get the handouts, how that answer has been structured, and the way that it talks about it in a narrative style of saying, you know, we've done this, we looked at that, the technological challenge, here's how we've done this, the market opportunity is this, you know, so it's really building up that picture of why this, why now, why should we even be looking at this problem? Now, one of the ways that you can do these answers is to create an Excel spreadsheet with each question in it, and then provide an answer to each one. So at least you know you've covered it. And then merge them in together and adjust the tweak for the word count afterwards. So that would be the way that I would do it. And as you go through, make sure you tick each bullet off as you address it, because at least you know you've hit them then. Now, each assessor will have a crib sheet, will have something that helps them to work out what the scoring mechanism is for your application. Now, this particular one is a previous Innovate UK Smart Grant crib sheet, and this is the actual what they placed their scores on. But what's interesting about this is you can see the difference between a 7 to 8 and a 9 to 10 scoring application. So the applicants present a good motivation for the project and are aware of the nearest state of the art and wider factors influencing the opportunity will get you a 7 to 8. But a 9 to 10 is a compelling motivation. We talk about having a clear understanding of the nearest state of the art. You've shown how the project builds on previous work, and you've identified those wider actors. So it's the compelling part. It's that that whole narrative hangs together well, and that you've really given the detail of that, which is challenging, as that question was required to be answered in only 400 words. So bear that in mind. I said this a minute ago, so using laying out the answer as responses to each bullet. What you can also do as well, actually, when you're presenting your answer, is put a double space in between each paragraph, so that it's easy for the assessor to notice that you've answered each question individually. You might find it challenging, though, to develop a narrative around that, where it sounds like a story rather than just being answers to bullet point questions. The other thing I'll say to you is, when you're providing an answer, it's very tempted to add in a lot of what I would call fluff. It's the marketing speak, the "we're excellent because." Don't do it. You're wasting words, and it also adds extra stuff to the answer that is diluting it, so that the assessor can't get to the answers as quickly as they need to. So discard any information that is not relevant to the actual question being asked, because you're wasting time explaining it. The other thing you need to bear in mind is describing your team and resources. So any grant funding application or accelerator or incubator will be asking you to tell them about the team. And it's really important that you get across not only what the roles are for each of those people that are in your team, but why they are there. What experience have they got? What industries have they worked for? Are there any big company names that you can sprinkle in there that will show the credibility of your team? Because an A-class team can make a B-class plan make money, but a B-class team will fail an A-class plan at any time. So you need to think about when that assessor sees that team, they need to buy into it and go, I think these guys can do this. Now, to give you an example of that, if you were developing a software company and you had Bill Gates on your board, you could just walk into an investor room and go, "Hi, we've got Bill Gates." And they would probably give you the money, because Bill Gates has made a lot of money, obviously Microsoft. There's a lot of credibility and validation in that team. And that's really important to the assessors, to make sure that they get that you're going to be able to do it. And within that team, certainly with European funding and with funding in the UK, equality, diversity and inclusion is not a token gesture. When it comes to describing the team and your recruitment practices, and some of them will get you to provide an equality, diversity and inclusion policy now, it's important for you to state that not state something like, "We will recruit women." Well, great, because we represent 51% of the population, so I should think you would be able to recruit women. Don't just make a point of it. You know, how is it that you're going to make sure that the way that you operate your team and that you recruit for your team are done in an appropriate way? The other thing that I see people getting challenged on is market awareness. There's a very big attitude towards, if you build it, they will come. We call it the field of dreams approach in the, to developing technology. But a lot of funding opportunities now will require you to demonstrate that there is a market out there pulling the solution. They are desperate for it. They want it. And you need to be able to prove that that need and demand is there. And so you need to be describing realistic numbers, recent references. Don't go using things like Market Watch and some of the old marketing agencies, because quite frankly, the data hasn't been updated since before COVID and is still showing a massively rosy picture that may not necessarily be true anymore. So what I would recommend that you do is you look at what we call bottom-up figures. So if we were to look at, say, developing a new part for an engine in a car, what we would say is there are X number of, an engine costs, this part in particular at the moment costs £100. And we know that there are 62 million cars made in the UK every year. And so 62 times 100 equals the number of the number of this particular part, the amount of this particular part that we can make. Now, we don't think that we can necessarily take the whole of that market, because there will be competitors there. And this is where talking about competitor analysis and things like that comes in really, really important. But we need to make sure that we're presenting a realistic figure for what we think we can take. So, 10 to 15% is seen to be acceptable. And so I would say, your £100 car part equates to 62 million, a 10% market share gives us 6.2 million. And that's what I mean by bottom-up figures. And realistic markets, please. Don't just go, mate, there's a global market for the whole of healthcare is billions and billions of pounds, but you're selling a particular app. And so you need to understand, well, the app in that market, that is the size of that particular market. And this is what's reasonably addressable. Project management. This is another key area, is making sure that you can describe how you will manage the project effectively. If you are requested to do so, you must provide a project plan, typically a Gantt chart or something that describes work packages, milestones, and interdependencies, so that the assessor can see that you understand what can happen in what is going to happen in the project, and how other parts of the project or other work packages could impact other parts of the project if they're not delivered on time. You will also need to consider putting in a risk register. In some cases, for some applications, they will be mandatory. And I would highly recommend that you include a scoring mechanism for understanding those risks, preferably with some form of red, amber, green kind of traffic light system. So it's really easy for the assessor to visually see what the potential impact is of that risk happening, of that particular incident happening. So describe what the problem is. Who is it within your team who will own that and make it sure that it's appropriate to their role and their background and experience? Think about the giving it a score. So what is the likelihood of it happening versus the impact of it happening in order to calculate a score? Also include what your mitigation strategy is. What are you going to do if that happens, and how are you going to make it less painful or stop it from impacting the overall business? And again, process that score once your mitigation's gone through. There are some risks that we cannot mitigate completely. We just need to make sure we reduce the impact on the overall business. And in my experience, risks are often barely considered by people when they're putting in their application, because they don't want to highlight that it could all go wrong. But actually, the reason why we're bidding for public sector money typically is because we want to de-risk a project that investors aren't quite ready to invest in yet. And so having an element of risk in there is important to demonstrate that there's no other way really to fund this right now, that the taxpayers are shouldering the risk, and the benefits and rewards to the economy as a result of this working out. This is again where a really well thought out project plan comes in. Look, we can do this. We just need the money. Can really help you to win over those assessors, because it shows that you have good project controls, you have the right people in place, and you have a plan if things go wrong. So make sure you've got that project plan. I do have templates, by the way, that I can share with you on these things. And when you are answering the questions, make sure you use the word count. If you are short of the word count or the page count, then chances are you've left out part of an answer, or you've not answered all of the sub-questions that have come along. And I see a lot of the time on a 400-word answer, they come back with 260. And that tells to me that there is definitely a chunk of information missing there, because there's no way you can answer 6 questions in 260 words and give enough detail and credibility to that answer to make it real. But again, I'm going to reiterate this throughout the whole process. What we're describing is a business case. We're talking about why public money is justified in funding this project, because it's taxpayers' money after all. And we need to be able to look the taxpayer in the eye and say, we presented value. We gave something back to the community that funded us, but be that in jobs, be that in economic value, be that in creating other job opportunities in industry around them. So particularly with medical applications or space applications, you tend to find that other businesses and service industries will pop up around them if they're set up in an industry. So those kind of things can be brought into your application as well. And again, it's about demonstrating value, demonstrating where you meet those regional requirements perhaps, or economic requirements. What is it the funder is looking for that would justify value for this spend going on your project or your business? Now, a couple of quick things to think about. How to annoy an assessor really, really quickly. And it's quite easy to do, especially the busy ones I talked about earlier, that one that will rather see you eat worms than give you some money. So the first things first is, a wall of solid text, and it contains typing mistakes and grammar mistakes. This is a really good way to annoy an assessor in 2 seconds and make your project or you as an individual look really unprofessional, or that you don't care about attention to detail. And as such, by association, that your project might not be managed in the right way either. I'd also ask yourself the question, if you had £1 million in the bank right now, or €1 million, what would you spend it on? And some of you might think, oh, I'd get a fancy car, or I'd buy an island, or I'd go on a worldwide trip around the world. Now, I want you to think about the brochure that you would look at for that fancy island or that car or that round the world expenses paid trip. Would you expect it to have typing mistakes in it? If it did, would you want to invest your cash in it? And I'd like you to bear that in the back of your brain when you're filling out your application, because if it doesn't look right and it's not professional, if you wouldn't put your money into it, why the hell would an assessor put taxpayers' money into it? So have that in the back of your brain. When it comes to actually filling out the forms, a lot of forms nowadays might not necessarily be paper ones. They might be online. I know from the Smart Grant, it's the Innovation Funding Portal. It's a purely online submission. But they do have HTML built into the application form, so you can bold things up or change the colors, and you certainly can with a paper submission. But from an assessor's point of view, this actually really annoys them, because it's all right if you've got headings to break up the information you're presenting to them, but they don't want to have to decode or just skim over certain words to get the answer. The one who doesn't have a lot of time might, but the others who are going to actually give you reasonable scores and give it proper attention are going to get a little bit annoyed by this, because you're forcing them to read it in the way that you want them to read it, not in the way the information is presented. If the grant or the funding opportunity requests appendices or appendixes are optional, then include them, because to not include them makes it look like you've not put in the effort, regardless of whether or not the assessor will read them. And I'm telling you now, the one assessor I talked about earlier who doesn't give it the time that it should, they will not read the appendices, but they will mark you down if they're not there, because it's not seen to be that you've put the right effort in, or you're clearly not provided all the information, regardless of whether they've read it or not. Make sure you put answers in the right sections. The Innovate UK Smart Grant is now been reduced to a 7-question response. It used to be 10. But I used to see people try to make references to other questions to try and make use of the word counts that were available. Some assessors, depending on how the information is provided to them, will not skip backwards and forwards between questions to make sure that that answer has happened before. So you need to make sure that whatever the question is that you're answering, the answer is contained within that question, because they could mark you down for saying you didn't actually answer that question, even if you've written it 5 times before in other parts. Also a point on that is try not to use repetition, because repetition might mean that you've not actually answered the question that you've been asked. You're answering the question you wish you'd been asked and just keep saying the same thing over and over. It's not going to earn you brownie points. It's not going to give you any extra on your application. In fact, it's just going to annoy people, because it shows A, you've not put the effort into understanding the question to provide the answer that was appropriate to it, and B, maybe you just don't know. And that's kind of worse, because it means that perhaps you're putting things in that you don't understand properly, that you don't have proper project controls, that you don't understand the risks, you're just making it up. So again, just be sure that you're not repeating yourself and answering the questions in the right places. Try not to use jargon or acronyms. You might understand them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person assessing your application understands them, and it all works in your industry. Certainly, because the volume of applications have gone up for grant funding, and for accelerators and incubators, it means that there are a lot of assessors now who come from all sorts of industries who may or may not understand your technology or science. So, and they're also told sometimes to not Google stuff. So they won't follow URLs, they won't try and find out what that means. And what it means to you in your industry might mean something different in another industry. So please don't use acronyms and jargon. And again, treat it like an exam. Read the questions twice and make sure that you answer the question that's being asked. There's nothing worse for an assessor than reading an answer and you're going, well, how does that relate to the question? I'm not even going to bother reading the rest of it. I'll just score it all as a 5 and they won't get funded. No skin off my nose. But just think about it. Think about it as an exam. Answer the questions being asked, and please use that narrative approach to telling a story. And if you're not sure what the answer is, revisit the small print, because at the end of the day, like I said with the scope, the small print's the bit that's going to undo your project. If in doubt, if you're not sure that you can provide an answer, or you're not sure what it's actually asking you for, contact the lead technologist or program lead for them, for that funding call, for that opportunity, and get as many answers as you possibly can. They are typically very helpful. I know with the Innovation Funding Service, which is the image that's on the screen now, They're really good, and they actually come back to you within 48 hours. If you email them, keep copies, because if they've said yes, that will be fine, you might find later on that you need to call on that if you get rejected for the reason that you've asked, but you've got something you can go back on. But typically there isn't really an appeals process for these funding opportunities. They get so many applications that you can't challenge it. You could put in a complaint, and then potentially if you've got one assessor score that is wildly out from the other ones, they'll keep an eye on them and they'll reject them next time around, but your application is not going to get revisited again. So put in the right one the first time round. Also bear in mind that a lot of funding opportunities will only let you apply twice. So if you can't provide a compelling business case, and by all means check this with a mentor, check this with a colleague, do the grandma test to make sure it makes sense. And by the grandma test, I mean, read your application to somebody who's not in the industry and see if they understand what it is that you're saying. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that it's clear, it's compelling, it's coming through, and they understand what you're on about. So be clear. Lastly, if you do want support with your application, or you want to talk about what opportunities are out there and see if they're right for you, please do get in touch. My contact details are linked in there, or reach out through the Sun Network. As I say, I am a mentor, so I'd be delighted to work with you going forward. Thank you ever so much. I'm going to hand back to Lena now. Thank you. Any questions?
Nick, thank you so much. Yes, I was going to say that. You can see here the question and answer side, and also the chat. We can also interact with you, have the chance to put your hand up, and we can select you for you to speak. And please, and for now, I can also tell you and reinforce, because this information was given by Nick, you will going to have the PowerPoints that I'm sure will be very useful. Also, Nick, open up the chance to have some templates, right, for the project management. So I'm sure that will be very useful for many of them. And it was super interesting, Nick. Here you're presenting from a perspective from micro to macro perspective of the construction of the submission application, from the reply to the needs to the why, to be very clear. Also very interesting, the details, right? Because then we have to be very careful in terms of the dates, of the budget, of the typos, the jargons. It's things that when seeing the overall, it's kind of difficult to have the big picture, and also be aware of the ADE, you know, it's very important, the equality, the diversity, inclusion. Especially in our day that we try to really follow a path of inclusion. It's really important. And then I have a question also for you, as we're waiting also for some reactions, but I can go forward. Currently, we're one of the national pitch trainers for Innovate UK Global Business Innovation Program, right? So I'd like to know, by preparing these companies to pitch during the international trade missions, as you're doing now, what is your biggest challenge, if you can highlight one?
The biggest challenge of pitching when for the GBIP program. So there's a couple of different challenges that people face with it, particularly with the Global Business Innovations program, because they are pitching in other countries. And so understanding the way, what matters to the people they're talking to is really challenging, because if you don't know who's going to be in the room, or you don't know what their motivations are, it's difficult to design a presentation. And the same goes for when you're doing a grant application. You're designing a presentation that appeals to the person you want to give you something. And so if you don't understand what their motivations are, or you can't connect your vision to their motivation effectively, you tend to find people switch off pretty quickly. And certainly when it comes to pitching and presenting, people switch off within about 15 seconds of you opening your mouth. That's how long it takes for somebody to work out whether they're interested in you or not. So for those sorts of things, it's all about, you know, aligning, well, what is the challenge that the other person is facing right now, and highlight it. And then say how you would solve that challenge. I hear far too many people say, I've got a widget, it's brilliant, come and buy it, without really understanding, well, why would they want to buy it, you know? And if the customer can't understand or see themselves in that buying solution, then they won't get involved. And the same goes for grant applications and funding as well.
Yeah, very interesting, Nick. And I see that comes also from an interesting and very diverse experience also, because you've worked with companies at the national, international organizations, also in the public and the private sector. So that gives you also a big range of vision of the needs and both and several sides, not both, but multiple sides of needs, right? That was, it's very interesting to see that you have that experience. You work also in European Space Agency, right?
Yeah.
And also in universities. So those are different worlds, we would say, in the way that they work and the vision and the way that they portray an idea, for example. Right?
Absolutely.
So it has to do a lot with not only the storytelling, the rhetoric and the focus, right? Yeah. So it has to be something that we really have to pay attention to. And
well,
my question...
I was going to say, I think what is worth bearing in mind is that we are appealing to humans. Okay. And humans make emotional decisions. We don't necessarily make rational decisions about things. And so we need to be presented with enough information to care about something before we'll take an action. And the same goes when you go out presenting. For example, one of the first things I always see people do is the first thing they do is like you did with me, Lena. And actually, I fell right into it. Is you said, and here's Nicola. And what was the first thing that Nicola did? I went, hi, I'm Nicola. Great. Why have I just repeated myself? You've just heard my name. If you can't remember it in 2 seconds, then we've got a problem. But the problem is that I've not drawn you into me then. I've not highlighted something. I've not said something exciting. If anything, if you're one of those people with a goldfish attention span, chances are you're going to go onto Twitter or look at your phone or do something else, because already the person in front of me is a bit of a moron. So, what you want to try and present is an interesting fact or something that's beneficial to the audience that you're talking to draw them into that narrative and start that storytelling approach. So usually you can do that with a statistic or, did you know that 15 billion pounds was invested into UK companies in the first 6 months of this year? That's a phenomenal number. And that's more than what happened during COVID time. In fact, that's less than what happened during COVID times. That's come down. So they're interesting statistics. And I work with a lot of companies that are looking for money and investment raising. So if I'm trying to appeal to somebody in a sales setting, and let's be honest, this is all sales. You are selling your business opportunity in exchange for money with a grant application. Or when you're going out to the GBIP program and pitching to international things, you're looking for new partners, new companies, new customers. Bringing that statistic out to start with, when I'm looking to work with companies looking to fundraise, immediately their ears pick up on the keywords. 15 billion quid, nice big sexy number. First 6 months of this year, UK companies, investment, are keywords that you can pull out quite quickly to draw in the people that I want to listen to me.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Nick. And it's a great way to start also the conversation with Simon, that we'll talk about also the pitching. Like I was saying, we're starting by how do you write, but also how to appeal when we present ourselves personally. And it's very important to have that line, the human line, of course, taking into attention also our audience, but to be sure that we appeal to emotions, because that's what's drawn us to the situations, to the people, and really make us commit and give us that millions that are public money or not, can be private also. We can also use these techniques also towards sort of appealing to investments and development. And I want to thank you, Nick, very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. You really could draw us to your emotions. You can see you're very invested into your way of working. It's great. And I'll pass the word to Simon. Simon is also, as Nick, a mentor in Sun Project, and is also a dual national of French and British. That's quite recent, I would say. I would like to highlight that as an interesting fact about Simon.
Yeah, and it's good for football matches. Yeah.
You're a bit divided. I won't say it would be easy, right? But is you working for 25 in the space industry across Europe, right? And also, as Nick, you had a diverse experience along the industry. And that's why we wanted also, and I find it very interesting for you to present also your knowledge and share your know-how in terms of pitching. And I will take much of your time just by saying that Simon is also the managing director of Access NAV. As I told, he's also a partner from this project, which gives context to this webinar. And I pass the word to you, Simon.
Thank you, Lena, and thanks, Nick. That was really interesting and full of insight. Yeah, it's a real experience that you're providing there, so people can catch on to it. Thank you very much. Right, hi everyone. So Simon here. I'm just going to go some pitching tips, or how to help you to pitch your company. It'll be a quick presentation, about 5 minutes. So when do you need to pitch? When do you need to pitch your company? So really, if you're an early stage company, you'll be needing to apply for grants, grant funding, what we just heard about, patient capital, slow capital, or you'll be asking for venture capital. So these are investors who are expecting a quick rate of return on their investment. So in terms of public funding, pitching, then the EIC Accelerator, the European Innovation Council, is providing about 1.5 billion euros of funding per year in Europe. So those are grants for companies with a technology readiness level of 5 to 8. If you want to know more about those, you can look at the website on the screen. And if you do decide to apply for a grant, then you can try it just by yourself, or you could use an expert like Nicola or myself to help you get that grant application through. It does improve the chances of success to have somebody helping you with a grant application. This presentation about pitching is more biased towards venture capital. So venture capital, you need to go directly to the people, often physically, to meet them, and so you'll have to find them through referral. So within your professional network, you may be able to find people involved in venture capital. Through your personal network, of course, that could also happen, and also online. All of the VCs have online application forms. The investment readiness level, the IRL, so this means how close you are to be able to have an investment, how ready you are, needs to be 8 on a scale of 8 or 9. So you need to be very close, you need to have sales, you need to be going through a sales process, your business is working, and you really need to be using an investor to take you to the next stage. So the VC is a more personal approach. When you do the grants, the public funding, you're answering questions, as we've just seen, very specific answers. Whereas with the VC, it's more one-on-one, because the investor will be investing in you as well as a person. This is a shocking amount of information, and it's just to show you, if you look up there at the bottom of the screen, TRL9, TIRL9. So this is where your company needs to be if you're going for venture capital, 8 or 9. You need to have a system that's been already validated, a demo system, a viable product that's been demonstrated, and you need to have metrics for your investment. So that means sales, margin. That's what we're talking about in terms of metrics. Okay, moving on. To whom are we pitching? Now, this is very important. You need to research your audience to know who you're pitching to. So if you know next week you have a meeting with a company that invests in decarbon technologies, and then you need to work out this company, the VC, who have they invested in already? Who did they invest in last year? What kind of company are they looking for? So you need to be really in line and understand the audience, who you're talking to. This is the same with any form of communication. When you're presenting and projecting to somebody, don't just think about the words you say. You should think about the impact those words have on the person in front of you. You should be trying to imagine their experience, imagine their expectations. So everything you say is basically to be handed to them on a plate. You need to understand your audience, and you need to be aware of what they're expecting, and you try to meet those expectations. That's communication skills. Now, in terms of investment now, ESG is mandatory. What that means is the VC companies are using very strict criteria They have compliance, they have to deal with compliance, and they have to deal with regulation, they have to deal with laws, and the money they're investing needs to be invested into companies that have environmental values. So quite obviously in the space industry, you're always very close to those environmental values. Companies using observation from space, the GPS systems, so you know about the environment, so you can put those factors into your pitch. Social and governance. So what that means is your company, you need to show that your company has good social virtues. So it deals with inclusion, it deals with diversity, and it takes those factors into account, because so often they get forgotten. Just an example, you know, car companies, before they can put a car onto the market, they use crash test dummies. So they're using crash test dummies before they smash the car into a wall. Those dummies were based on male physiology, and only now is the regulation in place so that the dummies that are used in those crash tests can be women, can be pregnant women. You know, before we just used male dummies. So it's just a silly example to show that people are not always respecting those criteria of diversity. Governance means the way that you govern the company and the source of funds. So you need to be showing that you have you know, clean source for the money that you're using, or the capital is come from you know, it's green capital. Right, so those are pitching to whom. Now what do you need to pitch? So this is really really the core of the issue. When you're doing the pitch, you need to answer all of these questions. So what is the activity within one sentence? So what is the activity? And which market are you going after? How much do you expect customers to pay? And this needs to be realistic. In general, anything you're presenting, anything you're writing down in a pitch, you need to be able to back it up with facts, okay? You can't just state things, as we say, pie in the sky. You need to be down to earth. You need to be ready to justify anything you say, because you will be questioned on it in the pitch. The VC investors are investing millions, tens of millions of euros, and they're very careful about where they invest. A typical VC company might receive 100 applications in a week. So they'll receive 100 applications in a week for funding, maybe through the online mechanism, and only about 20% of those will get through the first filter. Okay, and then so when the junior working at the company, he's filtered, got rid of 80, he's kept about 20, then he'll pass those 20 different applications on to his boss, and his boss will look at them and decide yes or no if he wants to talk to the person. So you need to be aware of these filters. Number 4, so why is the right time now? So many people who succeed in business, they said, I was there at the right time. I was lucky, it was the right time. So that's something you need to be aware of. What I like to say is you need to be ready to take the opportunity when it comes to you. It could be just very unexpected. You might pick up, meet somebody, a friend of a friend in a social event or in a reception organized by the Chamber of Commerce. You need to be ready to pick up the opportunity and run with it. Number 5 is the proof of traction. That means your sales. Where are the sales coming from? Who's buying into your product or your service? Number 6, route to market. How will you get there? You need to have good salespeople. We talked about earlier with Nicola the addressable market. Now, once you know the size of the market, then you reduce that to the size of the addressable market, and then you reduce that to how far can your team get into that market? Who's the sales guy? Why is he the right person? The salesperson, why are they the right person to address that market? And that's really key to sales is everything. The last point on your pitch to include is the current investor situation. So you need to be presenting the status of your company, and you need to be aware of the current situation. So if you're going for a Series A, Series B, you'll have to explain the seed capital, where that come from. You'll have to explain who the angel investors were. And so all of that information is very important. Right, how do you do the pitch? How do you do the pitch? Some tips there. The EIC, the European Innovation Council, is now asking for a video pitch as well as a slide deck. So you may have your 70-page document with all of those answers that they're expecting, and you'll have the 10-page, 10-slide deck, okay, similar to this, short and quick, but you'll also be expected to provide a video pitch. And the reason is they want to see honesty and sincerity within the company. So you need to present yourself as the CEO or the CTO, and you'll be expected to convince through video pitch. So you need to have communication skills, and you can also get coaching on that from experts in the field, but that's very important. The people are looking for the sincerity of your application and to be convinced, because you are pitching the idea, but they're also looking at you and how you present yourself. Right, in the pitch, avoid long, complex explanations, because people cannot follow long explanations. So they want short, snappy, punchy arguments, yeah? Don't over justify. I see this so many times where a company will say they're the best in a particular field, and they'll provide justification, and they'll provide another justification. And what you're actually doing is you're making yourself weaker. Yeah? The more you're justifying, it shows that you have maybe not a strong belief in your product, in your service. You know, if you believe in it, then you'll say it clearly, slowly, and that should be enough. In the pitch deck, use extensive use of graphics. You know, think about TV adverts. They're only 30 seconds long, TV adverts. The most famous advert everybody refers to is Apple in 1984 when they launched the Macintosh. It was just a TV ad, 30 seconds with Ridley Scott. So graphics are very important. The visual side, we live in a visual world. So try and use graphics. In other words, not what I'm presenting now. What you're seeing now is just some short ideas in a PowerPoint, but you can get extra points by providing short graphics, GIFs, video. That all adds to it. It's a lot of work. I know that if you're putting together a pitch that has extensive use of graphics, MP4 and video, it takes time, but it's worth it. Don't forget there's an imbalance between the amount of time you put in to your pitch. You will spend hours, days, weeks, maybe months getting your pitch perfect, but the person in front of you may only spend a few minutes before deciding if they're interested. It's not fair, but that's the way you have to push through. So the last slide, don't forget you're pitching yourself and your team. So talk about your team, you know, big up your team, your devs, talk about those, present those people, present yourself in a clear and concise manner. And venture capitalists, they're investing, they expect a frank, close relationship with their companies. As Nicola said, you may have a team that's grade A and the project is grade B. You can make that work. And as Nicola said, if it's a B project or a B team, then you're going to have a difficulty presenting that. So expect to have a very personal relationship with the venture capitalists, because you'll be spending many years with those people. So make sure you can have a good exchange with those people, and the relationship will last for years, hopefully last for years. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can submit them right now. I see Lena's popped up, so thank you. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you very much, Simon. Super interesting. Like we were saying, we have to try and combining what Nico was saying. The pitch perfect presentation is about standing out from others and be ready for opportunity, all to do with preparation also. Do a bit of our homework before, right? Knowing where to focus, and combine also the part of the image and the sentence, and namely how to speak to a video, because that's a bit different also, right? To do it live and through the video. It may seem that it's easier to record it, but there's some challenges there, right?
Exactly. Yeah, always short. My pitch, I've currently reduced my pitch to my company down to 2 words. So I make it very short. Yeah. And those words are European space.
Okay, good. And I see you have also many experience, not only as a mentor, certified mentor for Copernicus and also for Sun, but you also a registered coach for the EC Accelerator and Blue Investment. So from that experience, what can you say it's the biggest mistake or underrated skill in terms of pitching?
I think the biggest mistake is not being relaxed.
Okay.
People get, yeah, I mean, yeah, people get stressed, and when you're stressed, you will talk very quickly. And when you're talking quickly, you know, the assessors might not have English as the main language, so you need to be very careful about who's in front of you, the evaluator, the VC. So just, you know, if you think you're talking slowly, slow down, you know, and try not to say too much. Yeah. It's the question of teasing as well. You know, we talk about teasing. Yeah, Chris knows all about the communication skills. If you say half the story, then the other person, the lady in front of you or the guy, will try and bring the other half of the sentence, and that's how you get engagement and communications. Okay,
it kind of hooks, right? Hooks of interest.
Right, you're going fishing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a question here from George Richter. And he has a question for you. It's not exactly about pitching, but anyway, it's something that he would like you, and if you think it's on your in your side, he wants to know if you are involved also with EEC transition applications.
Okay, thanks, George, for the question. Yeah, the European Innovation Council has basically a lot of funding available to the European companies, and they are Pathfinder, Transition Accelerator. So those are 3 different types of funding. The Pathfinder is for companies who don't really know where to go, they're a bit lost. So the idea is that the funding will provide necessary steps for the company to evolve. The transition programs are taking those young companies with idealistic guys full of ideas and trying to make the ideas work and put them into practice, get a viable product. And then the accelerator program at the European level, at the EIC, is for when the product is there, we need just to get it perfect, get it deployed, get it into the market. So those are the 3 different programs in EIC.
So I don't see more questions here. It was a very clear, very interesting presentation. Thank you so much, Simon. I just wanted to share here some information about how can you follow up still some information about our program, the SUNS project, the Space Hubs Network. So you can follow us in LinkedIn, in Twitter, in Facebook. You actually will be announcing there and giving you more information also where can you find a session. You can see also, it will be this one and others that we organize in very interesting areas, especially with the focus on space innovation in Space Hubs Network YouTube. So please also check there. I think Christiana maybe can share this link, at least the one from the YouTube in the chat if we can, because there you can see other other events that we organize, namely a roadshow where Simon also participated, for example. And you also can check the website of Space Hubs Network, where you can find also all these links, more information about the impact, about our team and the results of our program. So for now, I just want to say to close our session, thank you very much for the ones that speak. Nico is not here anymore, but she had to leave. But anyway, she already said that we'll be sending more information. You can reach her out in LinkedIn. Also, Simon, the same, can reach him out in LinkedIn and through the Space Hubs Network project as is a partner. So thank you very much for your participation, and I hope you can follow up our works in Space Hubs Network. And happy holidays to everyone. Thank you very much.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.